Sometimes history isn't really history at all. Today, we're going to talk about a conflict from the last century that, honestly, feels more current than ever. It's a war that didn't just end, it was buried. And now its ghosts are literally being unearthed. This is the story of the Spanish Civil War.
So let's start not in the 1930s, but right now. Picture this. It's nearly 100 years after a war supposedly ended, and people are still digging up mass graves across the country. It's a shocking image, and it brings up one really, really important question.
Why? Why is this history still so raw? Why is a nation still dealing with its past in such a physical way? To get our heads around the Spain of today, we absolutely have to go back and understand the crisis that nearly tore it apart for good.
Okay, so let's rewind the clock to the 1930s. Spain back then? Wow. It wasn't just a country with some political divides. It was more like two completely different nations sharing the same land. It was an absolute tinderbox just waiting for a spark.
So on one side, you had the Second Republic. Think urban, secular, progressive. They wanted radical modern reform. But on the other side, you had the traditionalists. We're talking the church, the military, the big landowners. And they were terrified that the Republic was dragging Spain toward a Soviet-style or Bolshevik revolution. These weren't just simple disagreements, you guys. These were two clashing visions for the very soul of the nation.
And that spark I mentioned, well, it finally hit in July 1936. A group of right-wing military officers, including a general you've probably heard of, Francisco Franco, tried to pull off this exact thing, a coup d'etat, against the elected government. But here's the thing, it didn't quite work. And that partial failure, well, that was the beginning of the end. See, the failed coup didn't fix anything. It completely shattered the country. Spain basically split right down the middle. You had the Republicans, who were loyal to the government, and the nationalists, who were trying to overthrow it. And it didn't take long for this Spanish problem to become a global one.
Franco's nationalists were a pretty unified bunch, and they had some seriously powerful and ruthless friends. Hitler and Mussolini saw Spain as the perfect testing ground for their new weapons and tactics, things like the Blitzkrieg or Lightning War. For them, this was basically a dress rehearsal for World War II.
The Republican side, though, what a contrast. It was this messy, chaotic mix of socialists, communists, and anarchists who, frankly, were often fighting among themselves. Their only major state sponsor was Stalin's Soviet Union, which, came with all sorts of dangerous strings attached. But they also had another kind of support, thousands of idealistic volunteers who poured in from over 50 countries.
And this quote really gets to the heart of it. This was the mindset of thousands of volunteers, including famous writers like George Orwell and Ernest Hemingway. They looked at Spain and saw the absolute front line in the global war against fascism. For them, this wasn't just Spain's fight, it was a battle for the future of the entire world. And pretty quickly, this huge ideological battle just descended into a horrifying new type of warfare, one where the line between soldier and civilian was deliberately and brutally erased. On April 26, 1937, something happened that changed the nature of war forever. Hitler's elite air force, the Condor Legion, was sent to help Franco. And their target wasn't an army or a factory. It was the small, completely undefended Basque town of Guernica. Let's be really clear about this. This was not a strategic military attack. It was one of the first times in modern history that an air force was used to intentionally bomb civilians. The goal was simple, and it was horrifying, to break the will of the people through sheer, unadulterated terror. The world was absolutely shocked. And the horror of that day was captured for all time by the Spanish artist Pablo Picasso. His enormous, chaotic painting, Guernica, immediately became this powerful, enduring global symbol for the barbarity of modern war. Now, while Guernica is probably the most infamous atrocity, the brutality was not one-sided, not at all. The Nationalists carried out what was called the White Terror, systematically executing anyone they even suspected of being a Red. But in Republican areas, the Red Terror unleashed its own horrific violence, often targeting priests, nuns, and the wealthy. Both sides committed just unspeakable acts. By 1939, it was all over. The Republic, torn apart by infighting and basically abandoned by Western democracies like Britain and France, who were terrified of both communism and another world war, it just collapsed. Franco's nationalist forces marched into Madrid and the war ended. 36. I want you to just think about that number. For 36 years, Francisco Franco ruled Spain as a dictator, as El Caudillo, the leader. His reign was long, it was oppressive, and it was dedicated to systematically erasing every trace of political opposition, trying to build a new Spanish identity right on top of the Republic's ruins. So when Franco finally died in 1975, Spain had a choice to make. To make sure the shift to democracy was peaceful, the new political leaders made a sort of unwritten deal, the Pact of Forgetting. They chose not to prosecute anyone for the crimes of the past, not to dig into the wounds of the war. They literally decided to bury history for the sake of a peaceful future.
But as we all know, history has a funny way of not staying buried. And that brings us right back to where we started, to the Spain of today and why this story is so incredibly urgent right now.
Just look at this timeline. It shows a dramatic shift, right? For decades, there was just silence. But in the last few years, that pact of forgetting has completely shattered. A huge moment was in 2019 when Franco's own body was dug up and moved from its massive tomb. And that just opened the floodgates for what we're seeing today, as families are finally able to search for loved ones who disappeared all those years ago.
Places like the Valley of the Fallen, where Franco used to be buried, have become these national flashpoints. Was it a monument to healing or a tribute to a dictator? The intense debate over what to do with these symbols shows a country still deeply, deeply divided over how to remember a war that pitted neighbor against neighbor.
And that brings us to the final really haunting question. The Spanish Civil War is this timeless, terrifying warning of what can happen when political differences turn into pure existential hatred. As Spain continues to unearth its past, the rest of us are watching, and we're asking, how do you even begin to heal a wound that runs right through the heart of a nation?